Whatever's simplest.
Two really simple things from OG in this debate. Firstly, why it's just a more truthful theory to accept, and so we answer the metric of oppositions better, probably. And then secondly, why even if it isn't, ingenuity is going to be mistaken for Occam's razor, at which point we won't be advancing the theories that science needs to accept the most. Beforehand, do I need to characterize? I don't know, like the more complex the theory, the more it is like part of the more it is part of Occam's razor, the more there's a bias of the scientific community against it. Great, let's delve right in. Let's talk about why we think that in terms of truth, Occam's razor is just wrong. There are three reasons why this is true. First, because we think that the finding of a truth requires an amount of factors that is beyond our simplistic recognition. That is to say that the interactions amongst many factors in order to find a certain truth, such as the history and the background of a certain topic and subject, or the fact that it's interdisciplinary nature, so the fact that you interact between biology, physics, chemistry, when trying to find one truth that may relate to like health in a different topic, we think it means that you inherently...
Yeah. What is your comparative? How do you settle disputes in your side of the house?
More simplistic theories do not get more bias over more complex theories. They are treated as equals. Great, let's talk about why we think that in our side of the house, this is more true. Yeah, we did the first reason, right? We just think it's more complex. There's more of a background that has to be credited. It's less interdisciplinary. Especially we think that as humanity is progressing, systems become more and more interlinked, and there is more past experience and past things that we need to rely upon, which means that forming theories becomes inherently more complex, more reliant on previous axioms that led us to the current understanding of where our research is, and there's a need to access more disciplines and more things from them. But the second reason that we think the more complex theories are necessarily likely to be the true one is the fact that the more we develop, we think the less intuitive a scientific explanation becomes. This is because we think that development of complexity is based on what is the correct and simple idea, right? So the way that we self-select this is that if a complex theory has many axioms within it, has many parts within it, but it has been able to prove all of these parts, it's more likely that this harmony within the complex theory that contains so many parts and so many theories is probably more correct than one simplistic theory which states something simple. Even if this isn't true and is purely negative, note that at the point in which a complex theory has to reconcile all of the parts within it, this probably means that it's just as true as some simplistic truth that they are going to discuss with you. But lastly, because we think that there's a natural selection within Occam's razor, within the more complex theories, right? This is because if harmony within your theory, that is what I just said. I wonder what was the second reason. Okay, let's talk about why we think that there's still an ability to scrutinize the ideas and the complex theories on their side of the house. Firstly, because we think that there's an ability to quickly self-test a theory even if it's incorrect, right? So if you're going to implement something that has all sorts of like interdisciplinary things and that it relies on many axioms, and you try to implement it and you try to create a new blood test, like what was the company with the Elizabeth something, if you try to create a theory that is complex and it doesn't work out, no harm done. You can scrap that theory and you can adopt a more simple one, and you can defer to other explanations for what it is that you're trying to find. At which point, we easily way over our second argument, which I'm getting to now, on ingenuity. Because at the point in which you don't even start to accept theories that are more ingenious because you think of them as more complex, then you cannot do that initial test of accepting them, of seeing if they work out, and at that point deciding if they're true or not. Great, let's talk about ingenuity. See, I got to it before 4 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about ingenuity. A few things here. Firstly, is on the appearance of complexion. Because we think that there are two reasons why anything ingenuous is always going to seem as more complex and as more based on axioms than something that is already simplistic and that doesn't really change from what we understand the status quo as being. The first is the fact that it's not yet coherent entirely, right? New theories always have all sorts of question marks. How it interacts with the modern day, how it interacts with previous understanding of the field, how it interacts with revolutionizing, for example, physics in a way that we couldn't envision before when we thought that the world was flat. At that point, it always seems that it less falls into place, right? Because there are less parts of the theory that exist harmoniously with things that we already understand about this world. So this idea of tension with other things causes you to think that this is based more on axioms and more on assumptions that are incorrect rather than what is just true. For that reason, there's always things that are more different than status quo, the more they're going to be perceived as something that is complex. But the second thing is that they're just assumptions and biases towards what already known and what is clarification.
Yes. Can you give some examples to the scientific ways you use it? Is it in medicine? Do I go to my doctor, tell him I have a cough, and he tells me,
okay, scientific community and universities, does it accept a theory that is more ingenuous or more simple? Very, very easy, right? Do corporations create medicine according to a theory that is more avant-garde, or do they create it according to something that is very simple? Literally, what's the clarification? OOPOI, COPOI, OOPOI.
We are going to prove why Occam theory is likely to be true.
So advancing to why we think other mechanisms for why ingenuity is correct. We think that complexity remains in itself. We think that the natural... I've lost my pages again. Okay, we think that complexity remains in itself. Doesn't matter how much it is found before, right? So we think that as the human race advances, there are more and more things that require complexity, right? An analogy to this is the fact that we are now reaching AGI. That is to say that AI that helps us needs to understand things in a way that is much more complex than the human brain can. This is because as we are advancing, we can no longer rely on the simplistic understanding that we did before, right? This is why religions that are like a natural tendency of humans to believe in turn to secularity, and these are the revolutions and advancements that we see. Simply because we think that at this point in time, mathematical calculations when it comes to like realist subjects and stuff like that have already become something that this human mind cannot simply understand with really, really simple logic, which requires many more steps. It requires much more time invested in it in order to get to the right inference at the point in which we're no longer making conclusions about society, about science that are things which can just be intuitively correct. What are the impacts of this? And here's where I already weigh against any of opposition's material and why this may not be true. We think that new inventions advance humanity massively, right? Much more than anything that they may say about inaccuracy or stuff like that. At the point in which society now is secular, at the point in which you adopt AI or agriculture, all of which are avant-garde topics at the time in which they're adopted, these are the actual revolutions that human society goes through, right? The actual science that solves problems around the globe, and not the miniature harms that can be caused by inaccuracy, as oppositions may tell you that Occam's razor is inaccurate. So even if it's not entirely correct, we would say that just the bias against ingenuity is enough to make sure that the purpose of science to help people's lives is less addressed. For all those reasons, please propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for the speech and very happy to call the leader of opposition.
כן, אני כן אגיד שיש פה אקוסטיקה מזעזעת ואני שומעת הכל, אז בבקשה, ככה זה ממש משיח לדעתי, בבקשה תחשוב. Cool. Now let's switch to English, because I love English. English loves you back. Oh, okay.
One English.
Okay. I'm going to start here. 3, 2, 1, go. Look, I'm going to do very two simple things. First of all, I want to explain why it's just like the truth that the world is walking by comparing, and then I will explain why even if it's not true, it just creates better habits and better behavior of scientists as well, and by that, they're just making it the science world better. Yay, fun! Before I do that, let's do a little bit of clarification and framing to understand what we are talking about in this debate. First of all, notice that Occam theorem, I have no idea how to say the word, but Occam stuff, is only relevant when we have two theories which can explain the same phenomenon in the same likelihood, okay? Only when there is a conflict between this theory. That means we can still have complicated theory. We can still have theory that need a lot of entities, but it means that when I need to compare it to another theory that needs even more entities, I'm going to choose the one that is simpler. I think this is crucially important to understand because this just reduces most of the point of OG because we can still have those complex ideas which they want to get. Cool. Second of all, notice that we are talking about scientific stuff because this is the info slide. We don't care about practitioners. Go basic biology. We don't care about medical doctors. Great. This was before CG. Now let's go and talk about microsensitive cases or the other rebuttal Nomi is going to do. Why do you think it's likely for the world to behave by Occam theory? And let's talk about entropy, because it was, I take back a few years ago, okay? I feel that we need to understand that the universe as a whole is going through the stage of the less amount of order needed. Why? Because in order to create order in the universe, you need to enforce a lot of, you need to make a lot of force and you need to invest a lot of force inside the world, and that means it's going to be harder for the world. That means that when you have more entities and more things inside in any phenomenon, it means that the world needs to create and make more forces and invest more of that in this world. I think this is just less likely because, like I told you, the world is going through entropy, so it's trying to make things as simple as possible. It's also increased the chance that this phenomenon will happen in the world in the first place, because you don't need this like huge, all of those things that is happening together. Second of all, and specifically when we are talking about living stuff, notice that living stuff are all actively competing on this energy. That means they have to be as efficient as possible and to use the less amount of energy in order to be able to actually compete and survive at this point. This is exactly why we see it in evolution and stuff like that. That things have been less efficient and not use the energy in the same way, have died and have not survived. That means that if we see a phenomenon that still exists today and we're trying to describe it, which is what we are doing in science, it's more likely to become to work today in the most efficient way. Okay? Because even if in the theory it could have worked better, it's not likely to have been survived and not changed until today if it wasn't efficient. Notice that just means that when we are thinking on science in this way, we are more likely to actually get to the truth, and by that more likely to be able to describe the world better and create all the tech and stuff like that based on this evolution. No, I'm not going to take the word. No, I'm actually going to the closing. What? But I want extension.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have a theory with one axiom that God is alive. I have no rules whatsoever.
Once again.
Like that.
No, thank you. Thank you. Once again, we are talking about two theories that can explain the thing in the same likelihood. There is many holes you can poke on God, and this is why most scientists do not believe that God is actually the creator and other stuff. The thing that you have said exactly explains why we cannot use it for science, because at the moment you can just add more and more entities and just say, oh, there is God, we cannot understand it and stuff like that, is the way that you cannot actually get any development in science, because you can never disprove a theory and go on. More on that in my second point. So how is going to make scientists work? We're going to talk about their habits and their habit, scientific development as a whole, and then education of scientists, which is important because we are all educated to be science in this building. Great. So let's start by talking about habits as a whole. I think at the moment you are creating this generation of scientists, the idea, it's also just make them more efficient people, and make them more efficient and better planning, and more likely to be able to also explain themselves in a more simplest way. Why? Because now for many years they are trained and getting the habit of making things as simple as possible, of cutting off all the facts from their theory, and to be able to say things with the least complex stuff. That also means that they are creating this habit of activity, and they are also creating this habit of mind. They are getting used to think about things in the most simplest way, of making sure that they have the least amount of variables in their experiment, or making sure that when they are talking to someone else, they don't need to explain to him about 50 different particles, but maybe 5 is enough to explain this theory. That means they are more to then plan their life as a whole, which is good for them, but also plan their scientific research in a more efficient way with the less amount of effort that they need. And I think this is crucially good, because then science is more efficient, we need to spend less money, and we are more likely to actually get advances because we have less factors that might interfere in our scientific research and stuff like that, which we cannot see. I think this is already crucially important. But then we also think that it's just creating a better development of science. Why? Because notice that I just answered in response to the PRI of CG. At the moment you have the ability to just add up more entities and stuff like that, it's a lot harder to disprove theory. And why do we have to disprove theory in science? Because this is the way that we are building science. If you don't have the ability and the muskama of disproving theory, you cannot create collaboration and agreement between all scientists in the world, and by then you are less likely to get also other scientists to work with you, and you are less likely to get the development as a whole. I think this is it's just a lot easier to disprove things by the theorem of vacuum, because it's a lot easier to say, oh, nothing works, so obviously there is some other particle or some other variable that we have not found about. But in the other way, it does not work. It's a lot easier for me to say, oh yes, there is 50 particles, and the number 49 is super crucial for this whole system to work. You have not discovered that, and because of that, you have not disproven my theory. This is the exact problem with a complex theory, which have a lot of entities inside. It's not harder to prove it, and this is crucial to understand. Lastly, education of science. Look, again, like we talked in like 2 debates from the free today, we need scientists, okay? We need people that are able to collaborate and to understand the basic idea of science. When we have this Occam theory, it means that all of my materials are as simple as possible, and like I tell you before, you're more regular in explaining it in an easy way. That means that first of all, you're just likely to be able to it will be easier to train new scientists, but second of all, and more importantly, you're more likely to get the same training and same program in different scientific institutions. In the comparative, when you have a lot of theory and you don't have a rule to decide between them, you will get less agreement in the academy, blah blah, bad stuff.
I thank the leader of opposition and very happy to call the Deputy Prime Minister to the debate.
Am I audible? Realizing the chat for a second. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Rebuttals, ingenuity, and then a third point about non-meaningful discussions around Occam's razor that like keeps resources away from the meaningful discussions that we do need to be having. But before that, let's do the answer to the clarification that we get, which is that if we don't have Occam's razor, the way that we would decide things is only by the likelihood, and we agree with the if we have 2 theories that have like relatively reasonable, like similar likelihoods between them of which do we think is more correct, we wouldn't prioritize the simpler one, we would just strive to do extra experimentation and decide purely on which seems more likely. That is the thing that we are going for, which also then note that don't let any oppositions in this debate tell you, oh, if you assume less things, then this is more likely, because to that extent we think that that already is incorporated into the calculation that we are already doing. We give you a first point as to why if you have managed to prove significantly more axioms to a reasonably fair extent that is comparable to a simpler theory, it is considerably harder for you to get to that point of same likelihood if you have to prove more things, and at that point we think that you are more likely to be correct. With that, moving on to rebuttal. So we think that we get like quite a bit of like material for government from OO here. So we get this universe is disorganized. Yeah, this is a great thing to our side of disorganized is generally more complicated. And if it takes like extra energy to make things organized and neater, we think that simpler explanations usually are less likely and mean that you like more energy needed to have happened for that to exist. We also get the we strive for efficiency, blah blah blah, evolution, things get simpler. We think that evolution usually looks like things getting considerably more complicated. We think that we can do considerably more things that monkeys and chimpanzees can do, and that is why we've advanced. We think that generally doing better things looks like doing more things and more complicated things, having more functions, having a bigger brain, having more neurons. We think that it is very clear to us that throughout history, the more that we've advanced in our, and it's brings me back to what is the ultimate truth here, right? Which we think that as science has progressed, science has become more complicated. We have more theories. We have a wider understanding of how things interact with each other, and the more parameters that you bring into an equation, the more exact it becomes, and the more complicated it is. We think that this is material to our side. Another thing that we are going to flip here is this notion of we get more efficient scientists. We think that this is great to our side to the extent of you don't get more efficient scientists as much as you get lazier scientists that want to settle for the simpler explanation because it is literally built into the simplest explanation is best, and we get the less ingenuity ingenuity that we want to talk about. This actively strengthens our point at the point in which, with like people, it is not only like, yeah, it's easier to settle for the simplest explanation and not dig deeper. It is also scientifically acclaimed to settle for the simplest explanation, not dig deeper, not look into maybe there are caveats, maybe there is a specific case that doesn't work for this, and we need a more complicated rule to be able to explain the entirety of this phenomenon. We think that the point at which we actively encourage people to go for the simplest explanation is the point at which we get significantly less ingenuity. Let's add mechanisms onto that ingenuity. So a thing that we say inside of here is that things that are new are almost inherently more complicated than things that already exist. If something was really simple, it is relatively likely that the thing has already been found out. Ingenuity usually looks like, oh, actually, there is a thing that you forgot to add inside of this. There is a new thing, like Newton was great, but then Einstein was like, no, actually, here are new things that you didn't take into account, and what like we now know is more correct than Newton's original theory. We tell you that ingenuity is almost inherently more complicated than past things, and thus they, like this razor means that we have a bias against ingenuity. But more than that, we tell you that even if ingenuity doesn't necessarily mean complicated things, it looks like more complicated things, and thus can be biased against at the beginning, because we tell you that at the beginning that the theory is developed, it is not yet super self-sufficient, it's not super coherent, it's, hey, I found an X case scenario in which this doesn't work, and I think maybe this one has a new rule, and maybe in a few years I'll find out the unifying rule that everything abide by, which would be simpler than the previous explanation that we've had, and will abide by Occam's razor. But the fact that we use Occam's razor in science means that we stifle those theories as soon as they come out. We don't dig the research, and we don't find the better explanations that could have then in a few years become simpler once we've explored the caveats that exist. Extension?
1 minute.
Okay, no. I will move on into my point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your partner talked about how he became a secular society, how he had agriculture. Great advancement. All of that came with Occam's razor.
Okay, the fact that Occam's razor did not prevent us from doing a ton of advancements doesn't mean that we wouldn't have had more advancements if we don't have it. That's like the causation, not whatever. Cool. Let's move on. Let's move on to the correlation doesn't equal causation. I know science. Let's move on to my point. Cool. We tell you that at the point at which we, even regardless of whether in theory Occam's razor is correct or incorrect, the discussion about it is usually unmeaningful, overly complicated, and keeps us away from actually doing the likelihood thing that we say happens more on our side of the house, of directly comparing things, doing extra experimentation, actually trying to figure out what is the more likely scenario. Why is that? Because how many axioms a certain theory has is not a real number. Right? We tell you that like the POI that we get from CG that is like, what if my one axiom is that God exists? Yes, that is one axiom and is theoretically simpler, but that is a very subjective like a thing that doesn't really mean anything, is very shriruti, right? That one axiom assumes a lot more than like specific scientific things that can seem more complicated. We tell you that often for like is it simpler to assume that dark matter exists and like there is a new material that we can never find? Or is it simpler to assume that we have, like, Mond is correct and there is a certain constant that we just don't have in Newton's theory? We tell you that at these points in time, in which the discussion is actively like, is this simpler or is that simpler? And that is a discussion that I've actively had with people discussing Mond and dark matter, is the point at which we are not talking about the actual, do we have evidence for dark matter, or is it more likely, or do we have new galaxies that are abiding by Mond currently? Right? We tell you that at that point, even if theoretically we could have figured out which one of those is the simpler solution, and theoretically that one would have necessarily been more true because Occam's razor is correct, that discussion is very fruitless when we could be actually scientifically focusing our resources on proving things correct or incorrectly, on increasing our likelihood, on decreasing the likelihood of the opposing theory. We tell you that both it is untrue and that if it is true, it still does harm to the scientific community. We beg you to propose.
I thank the speaker for the speech and very happy to call the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the debate.
Cool. Hello. Nice. This is lovely. Okay. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, we win this debate in 2 ways. We both show you that it is a lot more likely that Occam's razor is simply the universal truth by which our universe exists, and we prove to you that regardless of whether it is true, scientists operate better when they operate under that assumption. They operate more efficiently, both as a community and as individuals. Before that, a lot of rebuttal. First, on the quickly on like interdisciplinary research and why it happens more because interdisciplinary is more complex for some reason. It isn't. It might be more complex to conduct. It doesn't lead to more complex theories. Interdisciplinary research is when people bring different ideas together to try from different fields in order to try and find a simpler explanation for what is occurring. This is the same as processes that have happened very frequently, for instance, with physics being applied to biology to explain very complex things that are occurring within biology with actually very simple rules from physics. This is what interdisciplinarianism looks like, and it can very often fall under Occam's razor. Next on testing and curiosity, and oh no, we just accept the simplest thing and we never question anything and we disregard important theories. Just no, that's not how we decide between theories, okay? First off, yes, Miriam. First off, there's the very important fact that we only use Occam's razor when we have 2 theories that have been reasonably proven and stand to we have to choose between them and we don't have any way of disproving one or the other. If we can disprove one of them, guess what? We don't need Occam's razor, we just know it's false. The second thing is that more experimentation is just a given. This is how the scientific community applies itself to absolutely everything. Even if there were 2 theories and we chose one due to Occam's razor, that is only the best we have so far, and scientists are still going to try and disprove it and test it and see if it is correct, meaning we still continue to try and find the best possible theory. It is just, this is the best we have at this moment in time. Next, the problem with the system that we are described to us is as long as we haven't disproven either of them, instead of having one that we think is the most likely one and the one that we generally accept, people are basing things on, I don't know, hunches. They liked this researcher who proposed this theory better. I genuinely don't know what is the comparative on that and why you think it's better, because they genuinely tell us it's no decision, and I think Michal explains why no decision is bad, and I will elaborate on that. Next, on their response to entropy and why they don't think that this is, because they say, oh no, disorganized means more complicated theories. Again, just no, not how entropy works. Entropy means that the world is looking for energy to expand and for things to not be constrained. More forces, more axioms of, oh, there are more actors involved here, there are more forces constraining the universe or constraining our existence, means we are operating against entropy. It is just a lot less likely to be the truth. And then they again respond to this about evolution. No, evolution leads to complex systems. Okay, but evolution leads to complex systems based on very simple rules that we have managed to understand. For instance, the theory of evolution is one very simple rule, simple enough that everyone here understands it, even though most of the people here aren't science majors. Now, the next thing is that, next we're told, oh, but people will just settle for the lazy theory, the easy theory. No, the simplest theories that require the least axioms and the least participants are often a lot harder to find. I don't think it's really step knowledge to say that. I think that we just understand, but think of, I don't know, Stephen Hawking and the theory of everything. Trying to find one uniting theory to explain many different phenomena rather than having to have lots of different theories means a simpler idea. It is more in keeping with Occam's razor, and it's very much harder to actually apply. This is why we need people to keep trying to apply this idea and keep trying to unite theories in order to try and achieve this truth. We're given the example of Einstein all made things more complicated than Newton. And again, no, Einstein created a singular theory that managed to explain many things that Newton didn't manage to explain with his own theory. In fact, when people spoke about Newton's discoveries, they said Newton left room for God because there were things that he didn't manage to explain and he didn't know what caused gravity, so it was a force created by God. Einstein managed to come and make it simpler and say, no, there is not an additional actor. We are bending the fabric of time and space. Why do we think that we win this debate? But you know what, first, closing, I'd love your extension, please.
How do you think research looks when we need to decide between 2 theories and not choose the simplest one?
Okay, I'll come to that in a minute. First, let's talk about why we think this is true, why we win the debate. First, that it's true. We just think it's which means the fact that this is the truth means it's overwhelmingly likely to lead us to the most accurate conclusions, obviously. But we think that, and
and as we've explained, simplicity is just more entropically efficient and therefore a lot more likely. We've found this to be true over history as well, right? Chemistry and biology existed as fields of research for centuries with extremely complex explanations of and multi-entity understandings of how things were occurring, and no one fully understood them. And it was only relatively recently that we understood that all of these very complex systems actually follow a narrower set of physical laws that have been discovered through physics, which explain all of this stuff quite simply. In the sense we've understood that neurons are just electric currents, that osmosis is just pressure equalization. This is the advancement that we have had within science. The second thing is that it just leads scientists to behaviors that we think encourage the most rigorous and effective research, both in their own research and in their acceptance of others. First, because of efficiency. We think that it prevents people from creating endless new theories with new entities. Because if someone has created a simple theory, and I can just say, oh, I've got a new theory, which is equally provable, and it has more entities in it, and so you just create a new entity that works within the system, just means that we are creating noise within the scientific community, that people can just invent stuff in order to get published and in order to make noise, and that will be considered of equal value. We think that when we value simplicity, we make it harder to innovate on the existing ideas, and it means that we're more likely to only examine ideas of value within society. Next, we think there's a lot more rigor in trying to achieve theories that fall under Occam's razor. As I explained, so the more simple theories are often more difficult, require more examination and more effort. Third, consistency, and this is exactly what we think happens when there is no determining factor. As Michal explains to you, we think that we need consistency, both between fields. We think our scientific community would not function if the world of physics and the world of biology did not believe in the same scientific principles and weren't capable of following them. It doesn't mean they don't think they can be improved upon. It doesn't mean that they're not willing to accept new theories that they come across. But we do need some level of consistency across the scientific community of the basic principles that we believe to be true, and also between institutions. I think this is critical also when we're teaching people and teaching new scientists. And we think that new manpower within the scientific community and people being able to learn the existing knowledge and apply it and find new solutions is just as critical. A lot of scientific discoveries over history have actually happened based on false theories, but at least there were people who understood those false theories and were capable, A, of finding out that those theories were false, but B, also applying and trying to create new inventions and advance society. We think a more accurate picture of the world means a better ability to innovate and develop and improve everybody's lives. Please oppose.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and very happy to call the Member of Government to open the second half of the debate.
When people say that Israel is the best country in the world, they are of course right, but in order to prove that, they need to actually compare Israel to each country. Here we don't need to compare to each country, but we need to have a comparative, which was utterly failing in all the first half, when they are talking to us about benefits to something which I don't know, because they didn't explain to me what is likely to happen. What I will do is actually explain to you the comparative and why it is likely to be accepted by the scientific community, then I will explain why it is better. Let's start. So we get just rebuttals about, look, a lot of entropy, so the universe likes to be simple. I don't know who the universe is. I don't know if anyone proved that he likes to be simple and against the entropy. Really curious to hear more about that. Unfortunately, they finished their speeches. Then they tell us, but look, it's good to be focused on the same theories, etc. We think that is exactly the problem. We think that Einstein would be much before if there wasn't such specific criteria and specific focus on Newton's theories. Let's move about what the fuck is the comparative. Firstly, we think that the most likely comparative is specifically talking about outliers. That is to say, most theories says if they are true, if in extreme cases they are still true. That is to say, to see if specifically when we push the atoms through CERN very, very fast in the speed of light or in high temperature, does it still abide by the same theory? Does it still abide by the same theory in stars very, very far away? Now, tells us, but if it's disproven, then anyway it doesn't matter Occam's razor. It's just not true. Most theories that we're talking about today are disproven in some extreme circumstances. When you talk about quantum mechanics, when you talk about string theory, all these things are many times disproved in specific circumstances. Why is this important? Because we believe it is likely that specifically theories will be now disproven, approved or disproved on the comparative according to how many outliers they are actually not consistent in. Why is it likely to actually happen? Firstly, the community always searches anyway. The experience in CERN that shows that the speed of light is bigger maybe, or something is bigger than the speed of light, took much attention because just interesting for the community to talk about it. I think that consistency is something that is very core in the community, and that they're likely to take that as an action. Secondly, we think that just in the term of human will and how we think about things, we really want the theory of everything. So a theory that explains as much as possible in most extreme ways is something that is more very liked by scientific community exactly in order to get a standard. That is very important. Now, why is it better? Firstly, it is just actually much more relevant to our world. It is updated when new things happen. Their side is actually theories that it doesn't matter what we prove, still Occam's razor decides which one is more true or less true, because it doesn't matter which experiment method or happening way. Secondly, we think that it is incentivizing research specifically to find which theory is correct. On their side of the house, there is no research to be done other than looking at the theory and says, well, is that logical link there or not? But on our side of the house, there is usually to create more research in order to find that, in order to make faster things like CERN, in order to make astronomical lookups. That means, firstly, we get much more scientific truth in general, and secondly, we're just creating more experience which expands the human knowledge. Secondly, we think that yes, sometimes that is not enough to talk about outliers. Peer review is also a very strong motivator here. We think that it is more likely to check theory now than in Occam's razor. Why? Because in Occam's razor you can only check if there is a logical link failing or not, otherwise you cannot disprove the theory. But specific here, when you have scientists looking into that, they can think of experiments to actually do in order to prove or disprove the theory more or less. That means that there is more look into theories and understand if they are right or wrong, and more incentive to actually do that. Moreover, because yes, we believe that sometimes it's also by how people believe in how science gets us. That is subjective but less subjective on the most extreme cases than theirs. I will explain it later. Before I move on, Tal, extension, please.
No.
Yeah, I don't have a choice.
If a medicine is good in the majority of the cases for majority of the people, why do I need to also work in Antarctica for terminally ill people? Why do I need the extreme?
Firstly, I think that the people in Antarctica are disenfranchised and need the best medicine. Secondly, I think that, specifically when you talk about what is like the FDA, they are just not, they don't care about the razor, they don't care about the disc razor, they care about people being healthy, so we think it's not important to the debate. Let's move on. Impacts of, we think that in the impacts of peer review, we talk about more money likely to spend money, and more people likely to spend and make science in the same thing together. Specifically now, when there are specific fields that can have experiments and actually further science much faster, that means that people are likely to go connect together and be on the same specific subfield in order to disprove the others. That means more concentrated effort, that means faster science all in all. Let's talk what research is likely to happen and why it's better on our side. On the side of Occam, we think that we're focused from the start with things with very little axiom. That means that when I start the theory, I want from the start to know that there's very little axiom on rules, and it's less likely that I will take it if I think it has more axiom on rules. Note, maybe very much later I can eliminate some of the axioms, but I don't want to take that risk as a scientist many times because of the hard work it will take, because I don't know that. I think that on our our side, it's not that much. We don't have that much, more likely to find faster things. Secondly, in Occam's theorem, I always need to connect it back to as much less axiom as possible. That means literally years of work just in order to connect one axiom to the other, in order to have 3 axioms and not 5. I think this is huge subjective and useless work that just doesn't happen on our side of the house. Secondly, look, it's subjective. It's really, really subjective. We think that sometimes you don't count, for example, transitivity as an axiom because it is understandable. But if you take anti-transitivity in other things, you are not going to take it. So that means that it is specifically pressured about how scientists think today. We think that the explanation of what is a rule and what is an atom and what is an actual chelkik is only as is subjective in and of itself. So we think any quantitative analysis here is just subjective on what humans believe. We believe that many axioms, maybe 3 axioms that we have today, can be explained in 50 years by one axiom. So we think that the whole quantity is irrelevant. On our side, we have much more relevant way in order to prove exactly when actually that happens. So it's more likely to just be more true and relevant to the world. Lastly, we think that there is no ability to work together 2 theories. We know, in fact, there are theories that are contradicting but still work together. So, for example, the photon that can be like an atom and also be like a wave. That is important because when you have the specific Occam, one is over the other because one is better. Specifically, when you talk about outliers, you know that there are cases where the outliers there are better. You know there are cases that they are better. So you are actually able to use different theorems in different sciences and not choose one over the other. That's actually even better technology, better science. I call you for all of these reasons to propose.
I thank the member of government. I'm very happy to call the member of opposition to continue the debate. Bar Ilan! Bar Ilan!
Panel ready? If we've learned anything from the 3 other rounds of debate today, it's that science is about finding the truth. If we've learned anything from the 3 other teams in this debate today, it's that no one has any idea how Occam's razor contributes to finding the truth. There are, however, 2 significant things that do change in the scientific method in the use of Occam's razor. Those are, number 1, falsifiability. Why it is that we are more able to falsify a theory and move on to the next one. That is, work on proving or disproving the given working theory and therefore test more things and be more likely to reach the truth. And secondly, we think the governing principle versus the comparative. Note, and this is very critical here, CG doesn't have fiat, both because it's an analysis debate and because they're closing government. To assert what they think is the comparative, they need to analyze why it's likely. We'll actually do that for you on why we think the likely comparative is going to be those who have the most power determining the accepted working theory in the scientific community. Before that, some rebuttal, and also let's just note, I did have a perfect case ready where I was going to prove in 7 minutes that God exists and on our side science is actually going to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt and that everyone else here is a heretic who deserves to be stoned to death. Unfortunately, Opening's concession took that from me. I'll save that case for World. Equity's going to love it. So, let's get into rebuttal. Hi, Miriam. So, CG tries to tell us that, right, the main rebuttal to CG just comes from the motion. Which is to say, to the degree that outliers make a theory less plausible, that is already taken into account. They need to prove that outliers matter beyond the question of plausibility as it is visible to us. We don't think that's analyzed at all. But we think there's a lot more here because they try to tell us, well, it incentivizes you to question theories. We think that is literally science. Everyone is set to question theories regardless. The question is where we can question these most effectively and where we are most able to find out which theory works and doesn't. That is by the principle of falsifiability, which aligns exactly with Occam's razor, and that's what I'll analyze for you. And yeah, that's it. The rest of it will be integrated. I'll try to flag when it comes up. So let's deal with falsifiability first. We think that what is unique about Occam's razor as it applies to a theory, regardless of the veracity of that theory, meaning even if we can't tell you which one is more true, which is given in the motion, we know that a simpler theory has fewer changing parameters. That is to say, and notice a couple of mechanisms here for why it's more falsifiable, it is easier to replicate in a lab. It is easier then to analyze and to take apart into its fewer parts. That means that we can look at each one and actually do our best to recreate this experiment, not to have one axiom out of 85 fall apart and then we're not sure what to do with the other 84, but we think we have a simple theory. It is much easier to test one theory. That means that if this theory does not work, we are able to simply move on to the next theory. Or in other words, we have chosen the most effective working theory because now we know that if this theory has not proven to be true, we can move on to the next theory, which seems to be the next most likely, again based on Occam's razor, so we can go through theories as quickly as possible. When we base everything on absurdly complex axioms, we simply don't have that luxury. We are stuck with one working theory, meaning if they are equally plausible on our side, we just have more theories that are looked at and considered and used as the basis for other research. We think that is a lot better already. But there are a couple of other things to say here in terms of the other axioms. We just think that something that is not based on Occam's razor, when we find one axiom that doesn't work or that is confusing, we have human error involved, we don't know what to do with it. It is also more likely that we find human error in one part of it. It doesn't necessarily mean everything about the theory was false, but it certainly means we have to call into question everything that was based upon this theory. We would much rather be able to know whether the working theory we have used is true or false in order both to base theories upon it as we work on it and in order to move on to whatever is most likely next. Now let's move on to the second point on the likely comparative and why one governing principle determined by Occam's razor is necessarily better. Before that, opening? Sure.
Yeah, if you want to talk about falsification, it is much easier to prove a thing false when you have many axioms to poke at, and proving one of them false literally like ruins the entire
That would be true if we were talking about a house of cards where you take out one, everything else falls. We just don't have any idea why that would be the case in a scientific theory that has a lot of moving parts to it, right? We think that when there are a lot of moving parts, and this is critical, because it's an important question to answer. When there are a lot of moving parts to a theory and you take away one, it does not necessarily make the theory false, it makes the theory questionable. That is to say, there is a lot there that seems compelling, it is no longer complete, we don't know what to do with it anymore. But secondarily, note that that also doesn't deal with anything we tell you about the ability to replicate this in a lab, to recreate those conditions, to understand them and put them together in order to check. That still stands regardless. But now let's talk about the likely comparative. We think that competing theories, opening half already tells you we'd rather one than many. We absolutely think, oh, I was right on that. We just don't know why we're likely not to have any governing principle. We think, yeah, in order for science to function, we are likely to have some sort of determination to have a working theory for most of the scientific community. Now, what is that likely to be? And here we're just going to be more likely and more nuanced. We think there's likely to be fighting, there will be ego wars, there will be people not sharing data, but we think most likely what is going to happen is that whoever is the most distinguished or has the most clout in the scientific community is likely to be able to push his theory as the one that should be accepted. That means that well-known researchers, because they just have the most say and they have big enough egos that they won't work if you choose someone else's theory and there's no reason to say no to them, that means people are potentially more charismatic or convincing, but it also means that these theories don't need to be on equal ground. Because it is very hard to say to a distinguished professor, look, yours is slightly less likely than someone else's. So even if this theory doesn't seem the most likely to us, that it's not far off, when we don't have a governing principle of Occam's razor, it is really hard to say no to the world's foremost expert or to whoever has the most clout or just the most funding in the scientific community. Ergo, we are likely to get a case where what is accepted is less falsifiable, but also simply less likely to be true, because it doesn't even have to be on an equal playing field in order for this professor to be close enough. Now that there's no governing rule, we see a lot more politics, and even when that happens, we just get less sharing within the community because people are still bitter about which one was chosen. But we also think that if there are many theories, and a lot of these are full of nuance and difficult to understand, the person who ends up winning this war is the person who determines the theories upon which we work. If you have fractures, you were already told in the opening, that's bad. But if you have multiple options for what it could be, and you have to choose based on who has the most clout in the scientific community, we will always get the same ideas based on who has the most money. We just don't get anywhere near trying to figure out which one is truer. We think for all these reasons you should oppose.
I thank you opposition, and very happy to call the government weak.
יש פה קבוצות שתמיד מפריעות לי מבחינת הרעש שהן עושות, שזה אתם. אז בבקשה לא.
יאללה, מה, אני יכולה לבקש מאיתנו ציור ושלא מציע?
כן, זה רעיון מצוין.
אוקיי, אז תבקשי מאיתנו אחרי שמעת.
את יכולה גם לבקש מאיתנו, כי לא יודעת לעשות אינגייג'מנט.
יש לך שלט כזה של לא להסכים נאומים ספונטניים?
טוב. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Two questions in this debate. Firstly, about how are we creating a better scientific community that can actually be part of creating like new theories, etc., contributing to scientific discourse. And then about better theories, when are we actually getting the truth, when we are discovering the truth. We think the first question is more important. Why do we think this is the case? We think as long as more people are involved in the scientific community, have something to contribute, etc., we are simply getting more ideas, and so we think this is more important because even if we are making, even if Occam's razor is true, not true, good model, not good model, in our world when we have more people thinking, we will get to this sometimes in the future because we will just have more empirical evidences, etc. We think in this sense we are getting much better results in our world when we have more productivity in general. First, rebuttals. We think in the case of CO is really absurd. Firstly, we don't understand why the strong people is the people that will actually influence science. Firstly, we have journals, we have peer reviews, we have scientists that are learning for years and years and want to be good and want to succeed, and their credibility is on the line in front of other scientists. We don't think this is the case. But secondly, we think it is okay that some people will be more powerful. We think it is good because we think most of the time if you are like a professional you will have more power, and we think this is actually, I think this is good on our side. Let's go to productivity, let's talk what we are getting here. So firstly, OG comes and they say, well, we have as humanity a bias against things that are complex, and also researchers are just lazy people, so they don't want to think complex. And then OG talks about like how I talk about the razor and not about the question itself. So firstly, we think that the bias that we have against things that are complex, etc., we think this is already less important than what we have in Boaz's side, because Boaz doesn't think that all scientists are evil or stupid or think in a lazy way, right? He says we are simply providing a better chance of exploring the truth when we are having our extension. I'll flag that later. And we think this is already something that puts us above OG in the sense that we are not basing our case on biases that some scientists have, some not. We also think that the scientific community is one of the communities that are less capable of being biased, because we think our whole process of being biased is so, of research is so controlled. So you need to write the biases you may have, etc. You are taught by that from a very young scientific age, right? So we think in our world we are not having so much bias, and if there is a bias, it is not very important on the OG side. Okay, so what OO comes and say? They say, firstly, this is good, this is efficient. Efficiency, very, very bad. We don't understand why this is good. Okay, we think we don't want things that are efficient. We think efficiency is the thing that is making us very strict
mind and not letting us think creatively. We think this is a problem, and we don't understand why this is something that is good. They told us scientists can talk with each other more efficiently, and we just think that if scientists are actually reaching the truth, it is better, because if we are reaching the truth, it means that our research is much more effective, and so if we will reach somehow the truth, we will have as much effectiveness as we want. So this whole efficiency during the process of reaching the truth is not as good as long as at the end we will reach the right truth. Okay, very good. But second thing they say is that it is very hard to rebut complex theories. We think this is just like, we think there are many other many more cases that you can say that a theory is bad because of them, and so we think in our world it is actually better. We have more discourse. What Boaz comes and tells you, and why it is the most important thing. Boaz talks to you about how it is easier to try and refute. It becomes a social effort. All of us are trying to do so because it is not something that is given, because we are not settling for something that is not the truth. He talks about how when you have one theory, it becomes a sunk cost, like we tried and build CERN because we have this theory about how the world works, and now it is so expensive, now it is a sunk cost. Now it is very hard to stop believing in a thing once you have invested so much time and effort into that. It talks about how it lets more people getting involved inside of the theories, because the barrier of getting involved is not as high as it is in their world, when you have to have the perfect explanation and also simple explanation, and all of those things create a much better discourse, and we think this is much better because it lets us to participate and to more people contribute, and we have simply more people thinking, and this is better because more chance of actually reaching some sort of truth. And we think this is just more important than OG, and also we think it is above OO in this sense. Yes, indeed.
We explain consistency makes it easier to learn and test the prevailing theory, plus analyze that excessive proliferation of theories happens. We've achieved CEO's extension more than even they have.
When we will have the right theory, we don't care how hard it was to get to it. We care that more and more people are involved in the process of making the theory. We think we get that on our side. Then let's talk about the search for the truth. Okay, so OG comes and say there is like an error on theories, but if they are true, why is it bad? And O comes and say, well, thing in the world is simple. We don't think this is the case. Boaz already told why this is the case, gave you examples. No. Boaz talks to you about outliers. Why is it important? Firstly, we think that as long as we have outliers and we are sensitive towards outliers, there is a chance that we will get more and more theories, more research for the truth. And notice this is a direct engagement to CO, because CO tells us about the people that can stop further research, can influence other people. If we are in a world where we care about outliers, when we look for those outliers because they may be making our theories complex, but we are not strict in our theory and we are susceptible to outliers, this is a world where we can be creative. This is the world where we care about the outliers. We don't let the influential people say, well, the outliers are not important, stick to our theory. And so we think this is the most important that what came on OG when they talk about is simply good or not, is outlier our world or not, because we just make people more critical to outliers and to learning that the theories are false, and so we are getting much more benefit, much better theories, and we think this is something that we uniquely get on our side. Obviously, it means that we get better theories. Obviously, outliers are the way our world is moving today. For all of those reasons, we call you to propose.